Next speaker, holding her paper in hand, Antje Bosselmann-Ruickbie, and her paper is entitled Putting the Emperor's Neck on the Line, the Materiality of Imperial Neck Ornamentation in Byzantium. Welcome, Antje.
Yeah, thank you for your kind words. And Betsy, Itai, thank you for the invitation. I'm so glad to be here and not to speak in front of a screen and to see you all. It's wonderful. We're talking about detail, and I start with an empress, kind of bridging to Cynthia's paper, the only imperial representative of somebody using magic. So this mosaic shows the notorious Empress Zoe in the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul. And yeah, she's one of the most well-known empresses because her image is very well known. She ruled the Byzantine Empire together with her sister Theodora in 1042 for a very short time, 7.5 weeks, I think. But the purple-born princess was also married to 3 men who became emperors through her pedigree. The mosaic shows Zoe with her 3rd husband, Constantine IX Monomachus. You have to imagine him now. So his hallmark crown is striking with regard to its height and assumed weight, almost too big for the petite empress with her small head and juvenile rosy cheeks. In reality, she was around 60 years old when this image was made. The obvious changes in the figures of Zoe and Constantine, who's somewhere else now, they have been explained with the reuse of an older depiction of the imperial couple, but with an earlier husband model. So her face would not have needed to have been changed necessarily, but it is assumed that the vain empress wanted the artistic equivalent of a beauty surgery. Written sources inform us that Zoe had her own laboratory to create ointments and creams in order to keep her appearances. Apparently successful, as she is described in the sources as still youthful looking in later years, Zoe's labs even piqued the interest of the medical faculty. So the hallmark crown is very visible, it's very high, and must have been very heavy, assumedly. And the empress was actually 60 years old, around 60 years old when this was made, and she looks very young, very rosy. And this mosaic you see on the left side in the Hagia Sophia was probably made for Zoe on her 1st or 2nd husband, and changed when she got married to Constantine Monomachus. Her face would not have needed to be changed necessarily, but it's a sort of equivalent to a beauty surgery in mosaic, an artistic form of that. Written sources inform us that Zoe had her own laboratory to create ointments and creams in order to keep her appearances. Apparently successful, as she is described in the sources as still youthful looking in later years. Zoe's labs have even piqued the interest of the medical faculty, leading to the 2012 article, The Byzantine Empress Zoe Porphyrogenita and the Quest for Eternal Youth. I recommend the literature. It's published in the Journal of Cosmetic Dermatology. Zoe's facial features with what seems to be laborious makeup are very well visible, and so is her imperial dress, the laurus, and the double-storied crown, the modiolos, literally the little pot, the female version of a crown. But what is going on where the neck should be? The later damage on of the mosaic represents one of the many questions and issues research faces when looking at details, such as the neck decoration. And of course, we also deal with the lack of detailed photography. If you try to zoom in the images you can find, it always gets blurry. And here it's an actual damage that blurs our picture. We mostly have to rely on pictorial sources, since there are only two pieces of neck jewelry that represent imperial ornaments with some certainty. The gold necklace with sapphire pendants from the so-called Asyut treasure, and I refer you to Betsy for the history of this treasure, and the gold necklace with enamels from the Preslav treasure, dating from the 6th, 7th, and 10th centuries. The aim of this paper is to focus on the development of imperial neck decoration in images of empresses and imperial consorts, as well as female saints dressed in the imperial style, and especially St. Helena. A diachronic review will address questions of materiality, development, semantics, and terminology. With regard to the topic of this conference, it is interesting to study the fluid border between precious metals and bejeweled textiles. So I'm coming from the metal side. I'm really looking forward to all the comments and questions of the textile and garments experts. More methodological problems. It's often to judge the pictorial sources. We've seen one example, and it's also the quality and the size of the images. We had the damage in the mosaic as one problem, but in general, mosaic is not made to be, spoiler alarm. You can see mosaics are not made to reflect fine details of goldsmith works. They're just not made for that. They were intended for distant viewing. And again, we have Zoe as a good example and what it can mean to translate goldsmith works into other media and back again, often creating an artistic version of Chinese whispers. And here she comes. This image shows a modern version of Empress Zoe, who was the inspiration for a very recent song, Dark Love Empress, by the symphonic heavy metal band Leaves' Eyes. Without the help of other visual sources and without the budget for genuine precious stones, the craftsman and reenactor Jan Behm told me in an interview that he used Tiffany glass for the precious stones. However, the white squares you see misrepresent what was surely meant to be huge pearls. Misunderstandings of this kind are an imperative to be careful when interpreting pictorial sources in different media. I mean, you're all aware of that, but I found this example so interesting. In the case of Zoe, we have three other images at hand, the size of which make it difficult to interpret the depicted Byzantine realia. The first is a gold coin from 1042, showing Zoe and her not beloved sister and co-ruler for 7.5 weeks. Theodora, it didn't work out with them. So this coin is very, very well datable to a very short period of time. Although reasonably detailed, the small size of the coin of 2.7 centimeter hinders an evaluation of dress and collar, but we at least get a bit of an idea. The two empresses appear again on the Monomachus Crown, together with Zoe's third husband, Constantine the Ninth Monomachus, we have so painfully missed in the first attempt. Only slightly bigger, the enamel only allows to determine that the neck is covered in something like a roll neck with two rectangular fields likely to indicate stones. On the 3.2 centimeter enamel with Augusta Zoe in San Marco. And I'm showing you two images because they're both not very good. The flesh color of the neck demonstrates that it was uncovered in this image. Apart from size, the Monomachus crown comes with its own issues since its authenticity had been questioned, but I'm convinced it's an authentic piece. But just to be aware that not everything we have is unquestionable Byzantine. None of the images of the 11th century Zoe seem to represent the empress with an actual piece of jewelry, but rather a collar matching her imperial dress, the laurus. Reviewing images, a selection of images in chronological order, will demonstrate that in Zoe's time, this was rather a new development. And of course, the famous mosaic of Theodora was made in 6th century Ravenna. The two mosaic panels in the sanctuarium of San Vitale shows the empress with a group of ladies, all with sumptuous necklaces. And the opposite shows Justinian. You all know it, so I didn't put it on this. It was too crowded. I was wondering yesterday, this woman actually wears a pendant. I'm sure it's the Aphrodite necklace hidden under her garments. Despite restorations over the centuries, another issue, the array of ornaments in this is a field day for the jewelry historians. Theodora wears a chlamys, one of the ceremonial garments of the imperial couple. The circular cut purple mantle was fastened with a fibula that is somewhat awkwardly sticking out behind Theodora's back here. You can see that the artist had, I don't know how much is really restored in that, it's all a bit dodgy, but it doesn't look right. A sumptuous broad necklace covers her décolleté, and it almost appears like a collar, but it seems to be a separate piece of jewelry, I assume. But again, the mosaic is not really clear. It's remarkable that she wears a thinner necklace on top of that. And of course, in Dumbarton Oaks, we have great examples to compare that with. The only surviving necklace to compare with is the gold necklace in Berlin with sapphire pendants that was part of the notorious Asyut treasure. And earlier pictures show that several of the stones were missing, but this is the way it looks now. The flat pieces of the necklace are made in the open work technique and are connected with hinges. The stones and claw settings and the pendants are sapphires from Sri Lanka combined with pearls and originally emeralds. Yvonne Stolz focused on this necklace in her MA thesis and came to the conclusion that it dates from the second half of the 6th or the first half of the 7th century, based on the opus interrasilo open work and the type of settings. Coming from this so-called Asyut treasure, a provenance from Egypt cannot be proven. And as Stolz argues in another paper, there is an interregional, international style. So you can find similar, not similar objects, but similar techniques, the open work techniques, basically from Rome to Egypt to Constantinople and everywhere. So look at the catalog by Emilia Jarolano with 300 pieces. But there's no comparison for this particular necklace, which for several reasons can be labeled imperial. And we have to be careful, of course, with these labels, but there are very good reasons for that. First of all, it seems in compliance with a paragraph of the 6th century Codex Justinianus, reserving the combination of emeralds, hyacinths, and pearls for imperial usage. And yesterday we heard about these hyacinths. We don't really know what it is. Pliny describes a bluish stone, and it might have been a reddish stone, a corundum or ruby, because many crowns have a central red stone. So this is still not entirely solved, but it would fit bluish stone, pearls, emeralds. Then the necklace has pendants, and it's again Yvonne Stolz's argument, I quote, who compared to a lot of images of the early Byzantine period, and she comes to the conclusion that a necklace with pendants was by the 6th century an exclusive imperial insignium. So here are some examples. It starts in the 4th century with this style of necklace. Broad necklaces have come into fashion with and without pendants. And they were initially worn by imperial and non-imperial women alike. By the 5th century, broad gem and pearl encrusted necklaces were worn only by members of the imperial household. the Virgin Mary in Santa Maria Maggiore is an example, St. Agnes, and the personifications Roma and Constantinopolis. And of course, I can't keep myself from showing the weight, the Empress weight of the Theodosian dynasty between 400 and 450, with this, despite the size, very detailed necklace. And then, of course, the two Ariadne ivories, probably showing Ariadne, the wife of the Emperors Zeno and Anastasius. The precious metal gem and pearl encrusted necklace thus became a hallmark of the Empress, and this continued up to the 10th century, as we shall see. However, exceptions prove the rule. This solidus shows Empress Irene around 800. To become sole ruler, Irene had her own son's eyes gouged out, of which he died. So maybe she was not such a fun person attracted to the bling. Or she takes on the male attire here. But you see, it's not a straight line. The year 843, the end of iconoclasm, is usually regarded as the beginning of the Middle Byzantine period that ends with the year 1204, the capture of Constantinople during the Fourth Crusade, and the installation of a Latin empire that lasted until 1261. One surviving piece of jewelry and various representations illustrate a distinctive change in the neck decoration of the Byzantine empress in comparison with the early Byzantine period. The necklace you see here in the left top is part of the largest jewelry treasure from the Middle Byzantine period, which was excavated in 1978 near the small town of Preslav in Bulgaria. Preslav was the capital of the First Bulgarian Empire from the late 9th century to 971. In 971, Preslav was captured by the Byzantine Emperor John Zimisces. And on this occasion, the treasure must have been hidden, only to be recovered almost exactly 1,000 years later. The treasure comprised over 180 pieces, including 3 large pendants, probably belonging to the second necklace. There's a lot of discussion going on about these 3 pieces at the moment, but I spare you that for now. 5 pairs of earrings with precious stones, enamels and pearls, rings and dress appliques. The majority of objects must have come from Byzantium as an imperial gift and cannot have been produced locally. There's no comparison for the quality and the materials. The dress appliques are all very interesting for the topic of this conference. And please allow me to deviate slightly from the neck. The appliques would have adorned garments, as we can judge from the wires attached to the underside. They must have been used for sewing them onto fabric. It wasn't a rivet, it is a little eye to sew them onto something. So thus, they were clearly made to merge goldsmith works and dress textiles. There is no other compilation of dress appliques of that period I know of. And I've been looking for an example, and this is a bit ambiguous, but here's an image from the Chronicle of John Scalitzes, made in the 12th century on Sicily. The dots are white, so it probably means rather pearls, but something in this kind is possible as to illustrate the usage of these. We also have a group of 6 pendants here. And although there's no comparison for these either, I could imagine there were maybe for a loros or to sew onto a garment. Any ideas are welcome. And we're now going on to the to a shopping tip for you. So the loros has come into fashion again. Go and shop now. we're going back to the necklace and its combination with the laurels. But first of all, we look how it's made, what it means, and look at some details. It's made of high carat gold, over 90%, genuine pearls, precious stones, and enamel. And precious stones in this treasure are corundum, rubies. We have emeralds. And in this case, I thought it was mostly glass or rock crystal. But for example, this one here has turned out to be fluorite. But we're still not sure whether it's a replacement. We don't have the documentation. But if this is a medieval fluorite, that's absolutely unusual. The enamel is mostly translucent, typical for the 9th and 10th century. And in a 15th century manuscript and one other source, we read the word smaragdos as a synonym for enamels, which is quite interesting, coming from the word smaragdos for emerald. We have decorations with birds, palmettes, and the Virgin Mary. And you don't have double vision, but we have two Marys. One on the pendant, one on the flat necklace. And they were probably not on the same size. We know that some pendants were changed during the restoration, but they must have been on two different sides. So when I've found this on the internet actually to show you that it's a double-sided necklace, and that makes a really great difference for thinking about it. This is a unique feature because the Asyut necklace doesn't have that. Once the second side, and I can't say front or back, I can't decide that because both have their own Marys. If when you wear it, you wouldn't see the other side. So what's the purpose of doing this extra work? And I think it was because when it was not worn, and the laurels wasn't worn every day, of course, it was a representative ceremonial garment and only worn on few occasions. So it's very likely that it was exhibited in the palace, as we know from Constantine Porphyrogenitos, that jewelry was exhibited. And so it would have not only been attached to the body. So it was not a private piece of jewelry, but an insignium, a counterpiece to the crown, basically framing the face. And most of the time it would have been even separated from the imperial female body and exhibited. Otherwise, the two sides don't make any sense unless you have other ideas for that. So it was an independent medium of imperial representation with or without the body. When you look at the necklace closer with this focus on wearing it, variability, one notices that the flat band doesn't close when it's lying flat on the ground. You would have to use force to really close it, but that was not the idea. But instead, when you close it, it becomes slightly conical. So it was really perfectly made for the neck. It doesn't fit me. You have to have a tiny neck. It's only 10 centimeters. But it was made specifically, kind of made to measure. It was not prêt-à-porter. It was made to measure. And for example, these little rings here, they're made from a different alloy with more silver. They could wear the pendants. It was all extremely thought through and highest craftsmanship. So this is one thing, and we have one candidate who could have worn it. It was the Byzantine princess Maria Lacapini, the most likely candidate. There were others. The 12-year-old was married off to the Bulgarian Tsar Peter I in 927, and according to Theophanes Continuatus, they took many things with them. It's very detailed. This is a topos in the literature, but it could cover the Preslav treasure. This princess was the granddaughter of Emperor Romanus Lakapinos and took the name of Irene, peace, to guarantee peace between Bulgaria and the Byzantine Empire. One of the two relevant depictions, oh yeah, this is unfortunately not very sharp, but this is her without wearing a necklace, unfortunately. One of the two relevant depictions is a silk fragment in the cathedral treasure of Sens in France, about the size of a postcard. At first glance, a perfect match, but again tricky, since the size and the medium of the silk fabric is not unambiguous. Also regarding the gender and status, one would wish the top of the head hadn't been cut off. At least we can date it because the Prince Valiant haircut is very striking, and that appears on coinage of the 8th and late 8th to 9th century. That's all we can go with. This one is much better. Looking at how things were worn, the image on the right gives you an idea that even the imperial pendants had to acquiesce to gravitation. Therefore, they had to be fixed on the robe. St. Helen, in the homilies of Gregory of Nazianzus, illuminates the aesthetical and practical issues of combining a necklace with pendants to an already bejeweled laurus. The pendants sit on top of the gemstones of the laurus. You can see that here very clearly. The pendants are sitting over the laurus and are not one piece, two separate items. The painter of this image would have probably seen things like this. It is very detailed, and you have to look at the full page. It's a couple of centimeters we are talking here. It's very detailed. So we can assume, although this is Saint Helena and not a living empress, that this is contemporary style. Please keep in mind that the neck of the empress is visible, and forget the comment that the model for Helena probably had a thyroid issue. The overlap of the two pieces and the necessary refixing of the necklace for every occasion where it was supposedly exhibited at other times were time-consuming, unpractical, and the Byzantines were resourceful and practical people. So herein might lie an incentive to combine jewelry and garment in a sustainable manner. It's surely not the only reason, but I think it also has a practical aspect to it. The last depiction of a separate necklace seems to be St. Helen on an ivory in Paris that was dated to the mid-10th century, wearing what looks like a jewel necklace over a chlamys, while on the 11th century ivory in Paris, the chlamys is fastened with a round fibula. I mean, it's not detailed enough to really decide, but I think this could be the last one of these necklaces. None of these fibulae are preserved, but this piece of jewelry on the left side, I could imagine that this has been used as such with some backing. It's just an idea. So forgive me, I'm throwing that to you and see what happens. Because we have the round type and this rectangular type with an arched top. From the 11th century onwards, we see the simplified laurus with a collar apparently permanently attached to the garment, a two-in-one solution. The comparison of the 9th century Helena and the 11th century Zoe demonstrates this change, which has been discussed in the literature extensively regarding the dress, and which coincides with the evidence of jewelry history. There's no surviving imperial necklace after the Preslav peace, which could be, of course, due to chance, but there could be another reason. One aspect of it is of interest regarding jewelry is that we see two remarkable changes. The neck is, as a rule, covered in fabric, adorned with what looks like pearls and other depictions like gemstones. At the same time, earrings were worn, when worn, not every empress wore earrings, they become larger and larger. And this is not a late Byzantine development, as we could judge from the pictorial sources, but we have Dumbarton Oaks again, 10th century, surely imperial earring. And this fabulous earring, they weigh 50 grams per piece. I mean, size of a palm. Best pieces ever. But it's again not a straight line. What you see here is Empress Irene in the Hagia Sophia with her famous red hair, the Hungarian princess. The woman on the right is again Helena, on the Esztergom staurothek, but keep in mind this may be 2 centimeters, the detail I show you. But it seems like the enamelist has imagined her with an uncovered neck. And I absolutely love this plissé collar here. But again, cum grano salis. So just to, just briefly dive into the late Byzantine period. We could continue forever. There's so many depictions, but this trend continues inside and outside the Byzantine Empire. And we have these well-known examples from the early 15th and the late 14th century. And going to Serbia, this is Princess Simonis, the 5-year-old princess who is married off to King Milutin of Serbia. Before we go back to covering the neck or not, I would like to talk about the terminology. And it was great yesterday, we already started talking about that. What is a maniakion? And this term had been used in the older literature for the empress's neck collar, bejeweled collar. And I've just recently read an essay, a very brand new one, still using it. So it's still worth discussing this. Magda von Barani-Oberschall in 1937 had identified the broad neck jewelry with maniakis or maniakion. But Klaus Wessel in 1973 had already rejected this identification and found a development from what is actually a torque to a broad gem-encrusted collar not convincing. A recent study by Zolt Mrav on the maniakion demonstrates again that this was a torque originally introduced to the Roman army by Gauls and Persians. Developing into a military decoration, it soon became a mark of office and a kind of bravery medal. It was given especially to guardsmen and standard bearers. Examples are the guardsmen in the Missorium of Theodosius in Madrid, perhaps largesse, an imperial gift of 388, and in the homilies of Gregory of Nazianzus in the late 9th century with pearls. It remains unclear whether the maniakion was still handed out after the 10th century when Constantine Porphyrogenitos mentioned them in the Book of Ceremonies. But in representations of the saints Sergios and Bacchus, it was a common attribute of their martyrdom up to the late Byzantine period. You see the famous British Museum bowl. These are the maniakion and the lauros, as Otto von Falke labeled them in 1913, from the famous Mainz treasure. I have to show these pieces because they have kept researchers busy for ages, and it was unclear what it was, how it was worn, because the Mainz treasure has a similar history as the Asyut treasure coming from the art market and so on. In 2017, there was an exhibition in Darmstadt, so it's quite recent results, although contested, but it's quite clear it was a 19th century assemblage, using antique pieces and even medieval pieces like this lunula here. That's surely old, but all the little chains, these impractical things are 19th century, so we can skip them from our portfolio. Through a selection of imperial images in different media, and I'm coming to the end very soon, each with particular issues for the researcher, we have seen a development in these representations, from the necklace to the bejeweled collar. A harmonization of male and female imperial attire and the disappearance of female imperial body, except for the face. The emperor undergoes a similar development, but keeps his shoes in most of the images. although imperial images were always formal, late Byzantine images represent the empress as a stylized doll-like figure, almost pressed down by the large flaring crowns, the heavy attire, huge earrings. And I have to say, I have to systematically go through all the depictions, but it seems like even the shoes were covered to stress her immobility. And this is something, Cecily, you mentioned that yesterday, and I thought, yeah, that's exactly it. It's the immobility, the column-like figure that you can only see the face of. Covering the imperial female body to the largest possible extent, so she can still breathe and look, goes along with with attitudes to nudity in Byzantium. And I refer you to Alicia's paper yesterday. We've seen a lot of examples. Nudity did only happen when it was absolutely necessary. And we find a reflection in the sources. Niketas Choniatis in the late 12th, early 13th century exemplifies this by praising a statue of Athena in Constantinople for its heavy garments. So at least she was naked. When nudity was unavoidable, most of you know these examples. It was elegantly covered by water in the baptism of Christ, or loincloths in the 40 martyrs, seen who should be naked. We have the private sphere. We've also heard about that, the erotis figures. But this is private, this is not imperial, or this is not public art, so to speak. Theological debate evolved around nudity and sin, and the imperial couple presenting the heavenly order of state and church had to be flawless, without sin, superhuman, human, so to speak. While the semantically significant bejeweled garments, the crown, scepter, and other insignia covered the imperial couple entirely, the body itself was covered in order to represent their God-given and stable rulership, one could say. This overview of pictorial sources in correlation with surviving realia confirms the observations made with regard to the change in costume. So that is something those of you who work in the Byzantine field know already, but coming from the other angle, from the metal side, this is entirely confirmed. So there's nothing that speaks against it from the material side of this. And for me, there are many questions, more than I think I've managed to answer. So I would like to, I'm really looking forward to comments and questions from all of you. Thank you very much for your attention and patience.